Hey, welcome back to Mr. P Helps with Precal. This is Unit 1, Topic 4, Lesson 7, and we're going to be dealing with polynomial functions and talking about the inequalities and when inequality is positive or negative by finding the zeros, as it says right here. So we have a polynomial. This happens to be cubic in this case because third degree, because of the way it turns. So the zeros in this case are right here and here and here. So we have three zeros at negative 1, 2, 3, 4. So negative 4, 0, and then negative 1, 0. And the last one's at positive 2, 0. The y-intercept is here, which is at 0, negative 2. The type of function, as I mentioned before, this is cubic, or it's a cubic polynomial. Okay, spelling. Intervals where the function is positive. So anytime it's above the x-axis, it's going to be positive. So from negative 4 to negative 1. So from that interval, not including or during the interval of anything that's greater than 2. So from 2 to infinity would also be greater than 0. To be positive. The equation is in factored form. So in this case, we have our three zeros. So those literally are going to be our three factors. I'm sorry, three factors of the equation. So f of x is equal to, so that's going to be x, 1, 2, 3, 4. So that's x plus 4. Keep in mind, it's always going to be the opposite, because if you set it equal to 0 and solve, then you get the 0, literally. So that's going to be x plus 1 right here. And this is going to be x minus 2 right here. And there you go. So there it is. You put that in a calculator, and you will get a graph that looks very similar to this. All right, so what do you remember about end behavior and degrees? Now, anytime you have an even function, or an even degree, sorry, not an even function, an even degree, and it's a positive leading coefficient, then you know the graph's going to look kind of like this. With your extensive research on quadratics, remember, if it's a positive degree like this, like 1x squared, then it's going to go up. If it's x to the 4th, it would also go up. It would just have a longer stay in the middle. X to the 6th, x to the 8th, x to the 10th, they're all going to look the same. Now, if it's an even degree and it's a negative leading coefficient, then you know it's going to go down. So that's the difference between these and these. So both end behaviors will go up towards positive infinity. Here, both end behaviors go down towards negative infinity. When one is, first of all, when it's an odd degree, like at a degree of 3, like we had in the warm-up, and it's a positive leading coefficient, then it's going to look like this. And if it's an odd, but it's negative, then it's going to go down the entire time like this. So the left side is going up towards infinity, and the right side is going down towards an infinity. Where the coefficient is positive or negative basically just flips the two end behaviors around. So when you look at this example, you can see that both sides are infinitely going up. So that tells me that it matches this right here. So we know that this is an even degree. We also know that it's going to be a positive leading coefficient because both sides are going up. The amount of turning points, so it turns once in direction, so if I'm going to follow the function, it's going down, 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 but then it turns and starts going back up. So that's one turning point, and then it goes back down again, and then back up again. So it turns directions 3 times. Our zeros, just like we did on the warm-up, are here, here, and here. So that would be negative 1, 0, and positive 1, 0, and positive 2, 0. The y-intercept is right here at 0, negative 2. The zeros are the x-intercepts. That's the exact same thing. The equation. Okay, so here's something that you may or may not remember from Algebra 2. So we have our equation just like we did in the warm-up. So that's x plus 1 right here. This is x minus 1. And this point right here represents the factored form of x minus 2. However, when you put this into the calculator, you're going to see that it doesn't look exactly the same. And there's a reason for that, because when the graph hits the 0 line, it switches to the other side. It does not change directions. So it actually goes through that point, it keeps going. So therefore, that has a multiplicity of 1. Now, here at this answer, it hits the line and goes back down. That has a degree of 2. So that's the multiplicity. So it hits the point and it goes back down. And then for the last one, it hits the point and it goes to the other side, that stays a 1. So now if you put this in the calculator, you'll see that it looks exactly the same thing. So where is the function positive? So it's positive right here and right here. Those are the only two times when the graph is above the x-axis. So that is when x is less than -1 or when x is greater than 2. Now you could have also written that in interval notation. That would be from -infinity to -1, and or it could also be from 2 to +infinity. That's the exact same thing as this, only interval notation instead of inequalities. Okay, so matching the equations, so the correct graph. So using what we just learned about multiplicity on the last question, we're going to do this question. So it's matching. So we know that it has two zeros, one at +2 and one at -1. +2 and -1, okay, I know it's not this one because it would have had 3 zeros, not just 2. This one also has 3 zeros. This one only has 2 zeros. This one also has 2 zeros. So I know that A matches up with one of these. Now, next thing I'm going to look at is the degree of each one. The fact that it's x plus 1 squared tells me that it's going to hit -1 and then it's going to go back the other way, which is exactly what happens right here. It hits -1, 0, and then it goes back down, and then it hits -2 and crosses because it has a multiplicity of 1. So that clearly tells me that this one is A. So this one also has just 2 zeros, so that one basically has to match this one. It hits -1 right here. It has a multiplicity of 2, which means the degree of 2 means it goes back down, and it does the exact same thing on the other side. Now, the fact that it's a negative coefficient is the reason why it's going down instead of doing the same thing facing up. So this is clearly C, which leaves us with B and D. Okay, so kind of a giveaway here is the fact that this one has a leading coefficient that's negative, which means you know that's going to be going down, whereas the other one is positive, which is the reason why both sides are going up. And it also has an even degree. So even degree right here, the biggest one would be 2. So here we go. So this one right here hits -1 and goes back up. And then it hits +1, which was the second factor. And then it hits +2 and goes through it as well. Remember, these two go through that point. It does not hit that point and go back up because it has a degree of 1. And then this one, so it hits +1, goes through it, hits -1, goes through it, hits +2 and goes through it. And like I said before, it's going down. It would have been going the other direction had it been a positive leading coefficient. So that's the reason why this one's B and this one is D. All right, so now that pretty much brings us to what our main focus for this lesson, and I'm going to do more practice of this on the next flip chart as well, because this can take quite a bit of time and it is kind of difficult. What if you were just looking at the equation? What can you find? Okay, so if I'm given this equation, I'm being asked to graph it, or I'm being asked when is the height greater than 0? So kind of like the questions we've had before. So I'm going to look at the 3 zeros, which are -2, -1, and +5. Now, you might be thinking the number line isn't spaced out correctly. That actually doesn't matter in this case. We do know what numbers are in between. So I'm going to first identify what ranges are in between what. So everything that's below this line is from -infinity to -2. Everything in between these two lines is from -2 to -1. Now, as I said before, they're not spaced out proportionally. That's not necessarily the case. That's not necessarily the idea of what I'm doing. Everything in between here is between -1 and 5, but not including both of those numbers. All right, so what I'm basically going to do is I'm going to test each one of these 3 sections. Okay, this is everything from 5 to +infinity. Sorry, I forgot about that last section. So these are all the 4 sections that are, to the left of this 0, to the right of this 0, and in between these 2 zeros. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pick a number, and it doesn't matter as long as it's in this range, and I'm going to put it into all 3 of these factors. So for instance, a number that is less than -2 would be -3. If I put -3 into the first factor, I get a negative answer. That's really all I care about right now, is whether or not it's going to be positive or negative. If I put negative 3 into the second factor, negative 3 plus 1 happens to be negative 2. So that's also a negative. If I put negative 3 into this factor, negative 3 minus 5 would be negative 8. So that's also negative. All right, so we got 3 negatives. And a negative times a negative times a negative happens to be a negative. So that's the final answer. The fact that it's a negative is our final answer tells us, is a negative greater than 0? No, it's not. So the fact that a negative is not greater than 0 means that this is not a part of our answer. So I'm going to go to the next section, and I'm going to test something between negative 1 and negative 2, which would be like negative 1.5. Negative 1.5 plus 2 would give us a positive number. Negative 1.5 plus 1 is a negative answer. I really don't care what the answer is. I just want to know if it's positive or negative. Negative 1.5 minus 5 would be a negative answer. A positive times a negative is a positive result, which means this is a part of our answer, because if we get a positive answer, then we know the answer is greater than 0. Now, you always got to be careful about what it says over here, and you should always set it equal to 0 first. I'm going to do the same thing right here, which is a number between negative 1 and 5, which happens to be 0. 0 plus 2 is a positive answer. 0 plus 1 is a positive answer. 0 minus 5 happens to be a negative answer. You got to be careful when doing this, because one mistake is going to make everything wrong. Positive times a negative is a negative. So these are our results. A negative means this is not a part of our answer, because a negative is not greater than 0. Anything bigger than 5 would be like 6. 6 plus 2 is 8. 6 plus 1 is 7, positive. And 6 minus 5 is also a positive. Positive times a positive is a positive result, which tells us that this is a part of our solution. So it looks like we have 2 intervals that make it a positive solution. So there's your answer. So from negative 2 to negative 1, or 5 to infinity. Those are the 2 times where we would have an inequality that's greater than 0. All right, so one more of these, and I keep looking at the time. I know that's not a whole lot of time. So negative 7, we have negative 4, and we also have positive 6. So this is from negative infinity to negative 7. This is from negative 7 to negative 4. This is from negative 4 to 6. And this is from 6 to positive infinity. All right, so I'm going to test each one of these. I'm going to pick a number that's less than negative 7, like negative 8. That'd be negative, negative, and negative. Negative times a negative is a positive, times a negative is a negative. A negative is not greater than 0, so this is not a part of our solution. A number in between here would be like negative 6. Negative 6 plus 7 is positive. Negative 6 plus 4 is negative. And negative 6 minus 6 is also negative. So that's going to give us a positive result. So this is a part of our answer. Now you might be wondering, well, how come whenever I'm doing this, I'm never getting 0? Why am I always getting a positive or negative? Because the zeros are the numbers. So when we pick something in between, we know we're not going to get anything that's going to be 0. It's always either going to be a positive or a negative. If you get a 0 while doing this, then you're obviously doing something wrong. And I'm down to a minute and a half. I'm just going to make it. 0 is in between. 0 plus 7 is positive. 0 plus 4 is positive. And 0 minus 6 is negative. This is negative, which means this is not a part of our answer. 8, positive, and then positive, and then positive. That's a positive, which means this is a part of our answer. And there's our answer. Negative 7 and negative 4, or from 6 to infinity. All right, thanks again for watching, and it looks like I just made it into the time limits. And like I said, in the next video, I'm going to do very, very similar to this, but we're also going to break it down to having this solve for the equation, setting it equal to 0. Other than that, the next video is going to be very much the same. Thanks again for watching. Have a great day.